the more that we dig into that and make it a norm to talk about our emotional well-being and our emotional states, the better outcomes we have. I mean, we know that emotions affect everything from our attention to our memory. What really hooked me is learning that emotions impact our learning.
Welcome to the MVP podcast. My name is Aaron Leo. I'm one of the therapists here at Mountain Vista, and I'm here today with Bess.
Hi, Aaron.
Why don't we take a little time for you to introduce yourself and introduce how you got into the field, and tell us a little bit about you.
Awesome. All right. So I'm Bess Bryan, and I'm actually pretty new to Colorado. I have lived the last 35 years in Asheville, North Carolina. So moved from the Blue Ridge Mountains here to the Rockies. What brought me here is I matched here for my doctoral internship with the Colorado School Psychology Consortium, and spent my last year completing my PsyD through Western Carolina University. And I'm so grateful to have landed at Mountain Vista Psychology after a wonderful internship in Douglas County schools last year.
Awesome.
Prior to going into psychology, this is my second career. I was an educator for 20 years. I was a K-2 teacher and learning specialist in a school in Asheville, North Carolina, and the mom of two young adult children, 20 and 23. So all of those things brought me to psychology. Being in the classroom, I saw the need to really better understand the way kids learn and how kids function emotionally and behaviorally and support their parents in that process. So that's what brought me to go back to school 5 years ago and to land here at Mountain Vista Psychology.
Amazing. And we're so grateful we have you.
Thanks.
I would imagine it's a big shift going from working for 20 years back to school. How did you find that journey?
I learned a lot about myself. It was quite a journey. I was ready for it. I think I had so much positive interaction and experience with the psychologists in the school system. And I very distinctly remember one day, like 15 years ago, walking with one of the psychologists that was evaluating one of my students saying, I want to be you one day when I grow up. So it was a very natural transition, but also really humbling to go back to school in my late 40s. And as a mom of kids who are starting to leave the nest and watching them kind of explore their young adulthood, and me digging into my next chapter, or as I like to call it, my next book.
Yeah.
So, but humbling for sure. Learned a lot about myself and made a lot of really great connections with folks of all different ages throughout my program, and was really inspired by some of the young psychologists that I got to know along the way. So,
I bet. Well, tell us a little bit about your work and what you do here at Mountain Vista, and whatever you feel like you would like sharing.
Yeah. So I started at Mountain Vista in August. So and I'm a postdoc here. So I'm in my postdoc year studying for my EPPP. And I am doing both psychological evaluations and therapy. With psychological evaluations, I'm seeing all different ages of clients with all different kinds of concerns, from autism spectrum disorder to ADHD, and kids, everything from autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, behavioral challenges, and learning differences, learning disabilities. And then therapeutically, I am working solely with kids and their families to support challenges related to some of those diagnoses that I just mentioned. So I'm working in both of those capacities right now.
Awesome.
And I enjoy that balance very much.
Yeah. You mentioned working with mostly with kids, but that obviously always involves parents. How do you manage that and like working with families, and what's your experience been there?
It's interesting when I think about it, because I have such a long history of working with kids, both in the school setting and now in more of a therapeutic and assessment related setting. And I think the main thing is they are the expert on their kids and their kids' lived experience, just as the kid is an expert on their lived experience. So taking a really holistic approach when I'm doing therapy or an evaluation, and really eliciting information from all different sources and really validating they are the experts. I'm here to support understanding their experience, but they are living it. And I think if you're grounded in that as a psychologist or therapist, it invites a very solid relationship with your clients, and invites open communication and conversation with them. That's just vital throughout this whole process.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
As a parent, I feel like oftentimes we know our kids really well, and we have a lot of blind spots maybe about various aspects of ourselves and our children. I would imagine that it's very helpful to have someone outside of our family system, walking alongside us and helping us. And there's just a lot as a parent we can't do or see, or we don't even recognize sometimes. So
yeah. And personally, with my children, I very much had that experience and leaned on professionals as I raised them to support me in both their emotional needs and their academic needs. I mean, even though I was a teacher, I leaned on educators to help me really see those blind spots, like you said. And I think that is a really important point. As parents, we do have blind spots, and it's really brave. I think it's very courageous for families to engage in a psychological evaluation for their kid or therapeutic intervention for their kid. It's a very courageous and vulnerable place to be, because you do have to look at those blind spots. As much as you're the expert, you have to look at those blind spots. But that's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, both of those things are true. We can be the expert and we have blind spots. Well, tell me a little bit about what you're passionate about as far as your work and what you do with people on the day-to-day.
Yeah. So from the time I started teaching to now in my psychology practice, throughout school, my dissertation and thesis, I have always really focused on emotions and emotional security, understanding emotions, and understanding how we respond and react to emotions. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today is understanding our emotions and the importance of understanding our emotions and how our emotional responses or emotion regulation strategies that we tend to go to. And like I said, I've been interested in this since a teacher. Since being a teacher, I many years ago, probably over 10 years ago, I was introduced to the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, Dr. Mark Brackett. He came and actually spoke at my school, and I was immediately intrigued by his work and went and got trained in something called the ruler approach that I could implement in my classroom because I believed so much in bringing this work into the classroom. Emotions are not just to be dealt with in a therapeutic setting. It should be infused into our family settings, into our school environments, and research shows the more that we dig into that and make it a norm to talk about our emotional well-being and our emotional states, the better outcomes we have. I mean, we know that emotions affect everything from our attention to our memory. What really hooked me is learning that emotions impact our learning, our decision making, our creative abilities. And then there's that whole piece of emotions impacting our mental and physical well-being. What I saw with my little ones was definitely that it impacted their ability to form and maintain solid relationships with each other also, and to show up at school in a really in a productive way, right? So, all in all, we know that emotions really matter across all of these settings. So that's really why I got interested in it, and kind of what I want to dig into today.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a crazy question,
Sure.
but it's one that I hear from people from time to time. What are emotions?
Mm.
And I'll leave it there. What are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of different ways to answer that question. I mean, emotions are they're physical responses. That manifest through they're physical responses that we have, and they come out in verbal ways, in physical ways. We feel that they're chemical. We release chemicals in our brain when we're feeling emotions. So there are lots of different ways to think about it. But I think when I think about emotions, I kind of go back to this structure of helping kids simply define what they're feeling by feeling in their body, because when we feel emotions, there are a lot of sensory things that are going on, right? And we feel them in all different ways, in all different parts of our bodies. Sometimes our heart races. Sometimes our chest feels tight. Sometimes we have shortness of breath. Sometimes we have temperature dysregulation and we feel hot or cold. Sometimes we feel it in different parts of our body, like even our feet or our hands or our head. I've had kids describe completely blacking out or shutting down because emotion, their physical response to emotion is so intense, right? So, I think one of the first things that I work on with kids is kind of recognizing what that is and how they define it, because we can put words to emotions like happy, sad, frustrated, angry, but it's so much more all encompassing than that. It's
Mhm.
it's a physical response as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like the first step to understanding our emotions is understanding how they manifest
Mhm.
in our lives, how we feel them in our bodies, for example.
Exactly. So, and not only ourself, but in others. And, going back to what I was talking about before, when I was learning about what's called the ruler method, the R in ruler stands for recognizing emotions in ourself and in others. So, you know, both of those things are important. And a lot of people struggle with that skill, especially if they're not neurotypical. They struggle with those things. They struggle with recognizing if somebody else is happy or sad or embarrassed or uncomfortable in some way. Um, and generally, we show that with our face, our body, what we call nonverbal communication.
Right.
Um, and so learning how to recognize those things in ourselves and in others is really is really important
Yeah.
and part of the work that I do with my kids and families.
So once someone's recognized what they're feeling and what others may be feeling, what comes next?
So the next is in this structure is the U, which is understanding the causes and consequences of those emotions. This is also something that we look at in both a school and therapeutic environment, right? We've got to understand, why are we feeling this way in the first place? What caused it? Was it that I'm hungry, or was it that I didn't get the toy that I wanted, or that I was told no, um, or that somebody was mean to me? So understanding what caused the emotion and the consequences of the emotion. In other words, what did that make me do? When I felt that emotion, what did I do with it? Did I hit? Did I walk away? Did I yell?
Mhm.
What did I do? What was the consequence of that emotion, whether big or small? And one thing that it never ceases to amaze me. I'll often ask my clients, so do you think it's bad to be mad or angry or even enraged? And they're like, oh yeah, that's bad. And
Mhm.
I'm like, it's so interesting to do that piece of what we call psychoeducation and really help them understand there really is no bad emotion.
Yeah.
There are comfortable emotions and there are uncomfortable emotions. So all of this that I'm talking about really applies to both comfortable and uncomfortable emotions, right? Um, we can recognize comfortable emotions just as easily as uncomfortable emotions all day long, and incorporate that even into a gratitude practice, right?
Yeah.
Um, but helping kids understand it's not bad to have the emotion. Sometimes the consequence, though, is the piece and the behavior and the regulation strategy that we're using. Those are the things that we need to tweak and work on.
Right. Well, I was going to say obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but it seems to me anyway that we don't control the emotion. The emotion comes from wherever it comes from, but we do have some control over how we respond to that emotion.
We can certainly learn to,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it takes a lot of practice, and we don't always get it right. And that's an important part of the learning too, that we
yeah,
don't always get it right. And that sometimes we have to really sit back and reflect about how we handled the situation when we were in a heightened emotional state.
yeah. The
Um,
other thing, sorry, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
The other thing you made me think about was defining ourselves by our emotions. So
Mm,
when someone's having a bad emotion, an uncomfortable emotion,
yeah.
feeling like they are bad because they're having the emotion, which
I'm sure you see that in your practice as much as I do mine. Kids coming in and saying, I am a bad kid.
Mhm,
I am a bad kid. My family cannot handle me.
mhm,
And you know, they do. They can really label themselves as bad or unworthy or unwanted, which is also, I mean, that's really hard to see, and that too is part of our therapeutic work, is separating the emotion from the behavior, and helping kids and families understand that those are two separate things. Emotions and behaviors are two separate things, and we're not defined by those things. And the behavior, that's what we're trying to work on. Yeah. So, but I was also gonna say, um, you know, when we are in a heightened emotional space, or maybe not even heightened, um, even a neutral emotional space, another really important part of emotions is being able to label the emotion. And one of the things which is the L in ruler, um, but one of the things that I really work on with my therapy clients, and also that and their parents, believe it or not, um, is really expanding their emotion vocabulary, and trying to expand that, trying to help them identify enraged is 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 different than frustrated and just angry or low key annoyed, right? And really helping them to do that, because if a kid comes to a parent and says, I am enraged, and they're really letting their parent know, I am feeling this right now, then the parent can act accordingly and help them find the appropriate strategy. Whereas if they come and say, this is really frustrating me, then the parent doesn't need to jump in as deeply with a strategy to support them, right? And they can say, all right, well, let's use a different regulation strategy for when you're really enraged and when you're just frustrated or annoyed.
right,
um, and helping them understand those feel different in their bodies as well. Sadness feels really different than clinical depression.
mm,
You know,
yeah,
those things mean two very different things. So
yeah.
that's another thing that I really try to support.
The labeling entails, you said, like a broadening of vocabulary
Yeah,
that allows us to ideally, to better cope with the feeling in an appropriate manner.
absolutely.
I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And to understand, and this is all really hard to do. I mean, sometimes I talk about these things, like people should just expect to know how to do that and expect to know how to tune into their body and understand what being enraged feels like rather than just being annoyed. And that's really hard. It's really hard to tap into our bodies and then attach a label to that physiological response, going back to defining emotion, right? It's hard to do that. It's hard to put a label on a physiological response.
Right. So. And it's hard given as parents, we have our own emotional worlds going on, then to help guide our kids as they're having their emotional worlds happen.
Yes.
And so I would imagine recognizing the two and separating them when they need to be separated and working for the benefit of our kids it's not an easy task.
It's not. No. And, and I think especially when you're first getting started in therapeutic work, and you're coming in with a kid with significant behavioral challenges or a kid that's neurodiverse and doesn't necessarily know the language or have the ability to tap into those feelings and put that physiological response and have the words to connect it. This can be a journey. It's not easy.
Yeah.
So it's all a process.
Yeah, it's not easy, but we, like you said, we can grow hopefully over time.
Absolutely. And then, and that's kind of it leading into the next part of the ruler structure is the E, which is expressing those emotions in a way that fits with learning how to express those emotions in a way that kind of fits with cultural and societal norms, right? And understanding that, being aware of those things and working to look outside of yourself and have a little bit of understanding of how are things around me working and how am I gonna express my emotions in a way that will be received and help me build positive relationships in my family, in my school, with my peers. And when I say cultural and social norms, that's a big spectrum. And I want to be very clear that I'm not talking about everybody fitting into a little box. It's a spectrum, and we need to be aware of that spectrum and aware that different cultures and that there are different cultural and societal norms depending on where you are, who you are, and honoring those as we do the work with these with kids and families. Just being aware of that, and again, leaning into they are the expert on their culture and their lived experience. So leaning into that and supporting that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that I say frequently with clients, which is not everyone is safe to share your vulnerability with.
Yeah.
And similarly, like you're not going to be able to express your emotions with everyone in every circumstance. But hopefully we all have places where we do feel safe to do that. And a part of that, like you're saying, is recognizing the way the world works.
Yeah. And the way your community works and your family works. So I think that's a really important piece. This piece, I'll get personal again for a moment. I'm a single mom. I adopted both of my children from Guatemala. So this has been a big learning curve for me personally, is understanding the way that they move in the world as being young adults of color and children of color as they were growing up, being raised in a white household with me as a single mom. So it's that, that piece is important, those nuances of what are you comfortable with? What do you want to explore? As you develop your identity, this is all tied in with that identity work. And identity comes from so many different places, from family, school, community, culture, church, all of these things that form us as individuals. So so that piece is really important. And I think you're right on that it's important to tell our clients, this is not necessarily gonna feel comfortable everywhere, but find the people that it does feel comfortable with, and that's where you can share some of these things. So
finding your tribe, it's strikes me as, maybe I'm wrong, but with increased use of technology and social media and so much of our lives being online now, that both increases the pool of people that we can find our tribe with, and it alters the way we're interacting with people, oftentimes less face to face and in social circumstances. I don't know if you, in your experience, have you seen that dynamic unfolding?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we are in a time where, our brains and physiological responses are changing at a rapid pace. And I have definitely seen kids who do better in a more interpersonal, face-to-face, touchy-feely environment. And then I have seen kids who do much better when they can find people who align with them in a virtual setting, through gaming, or even online support groups. Like these things are very important, especially for a neurodivergent community who might have challenges, sensory challenges, and it might be hard to be face to face, or in a building, or in a support group, face to face. That might be too much stimulation. So I think there are positives and challenges with all of it. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's a very deep rabbit hole of, we are changing at a rapid pace, and there is opportunity and challenge with all of this rapidly developing technology.
Yeah, and there is no right answer. We're all navigating it together in real time. So
we are where we are, like you said, in real time. Exactly.
Okay, recognize, understand, label,
express,
and then what's the
final R is regulating emotions with helpful strategies. So once we feel that comfortable or uncomfortable emotion, and we label it and express it in a certain way, how do we regulate it, right? And how do we learn the skills of emotion regulation, which is something else that I would dig into in my classroom, and something that I dig into with my therapy clients, for sure.
I'm going to ask another silly question. Do we only regulate uncomfortable emotions?
Not at all. Not at all. I'll use the example of, a kiddo who just got a new puppy, and they bust into the classroom the very next morning after spending their first night with the puppy, and they are bumping into chairs and jumping on their friends and their teacher and just screaming at the top of their lungs about this new four-legged awesomeness that came into their world. And it's like, that is great for a moment, but if we don't regulate that, then there is no learning, there is no connection, there is no if we don't learn how to regulate that, it's going to be really hard for us to move on to the next thing and really dig into those things that are important in that space of homeostasis, right? Emotional homeostasis. So it can be comfortable or uncomfortable emotions. Of course, I think, we think so much about the uncomfortable or negative emotions showing up, because that we just, we tend to pay more attention to those. But even those really, really big, exuberant emotions can impact our relationships and our learning.
Another silly question. What is regulating?
Yeah. So when I think about emotion regulation, there are a lot of ways that we regulate or bring our emotional state back to a place. I used the word homeostasis, right? A place where we can more evenly connect with others, express our needs, wants, desires, learn, and function in the world. When I think about homeostasis, I think about us being able to do all of those things that help us kind of move forward in our day to day. So, I think across cultures and societal norms, there are so many ways that people regulate themselves when they're in a heightened emotional state, and some of there really 8 that I like to dig into and really talk with my clients about. It's so interesting. Part of my research was training a group of students on these 8 emotion regulation strategies and seeing which ones they were more drawn to, right? That's just a little blip into my research, but it was more complex than that. But it was so interesting because one of the emotion regulation strategies that I think we talk about a lot these days is what we call somatic relaxation. And this is, this can be really important to some people. And it's important to me. And what I heard loud and clear from the population that I was working with is that somatic relaxation, which involves, it's basically releasing tension through taking slow, deep breaths, or what we call progressive muscle relaxation, and kind of grounding ourselves in some of these more mindful strategies, right? It was the least preferred emotion regulation strategy of the population that I was working with. Another part of my history is I ran a nonprofit in the summers for students from historically marginalized populations. It was a 6-week summer enrichment program where they did academics and also swam, had field trips, all of those things as well. And there was a big emotion education component to this program. And so when we think about this population in historically marginalized populations, a lot of times we see significant trauma. And when I started digging in and doing research, somatic relaxation can be really, really hard for a population that has been impacted by trauma. And so it made perfect sense to me as I really dug in to understand the why. But it's amazing how somatic relaxation is infused in a lot of our schools these days. It's like, okay, we're going to have a mindful moment and we're going to do some yoga or breathing. And when I ring the chime, we're going to do 3 deep breaths. I did it in my classroom, right? But I also really I tell my kids, this can be a tool, but it's not the only tool. And it might not be your first go-to, but it can be in your back pocket. It can be in your toolbox, and use it when you feel like it's important, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I found that very interesting.
It is. And going back to the humbling experience you talked about in the beginning, just always remembering that we are all individuals. We all have biases. We all have things that work great for us and they might not for others. And we know only a little bit.
Yeah. So I mentioned there were 8, and if you want, I can talk about the others as well, just to kind of give listeners an idea of some of the other things that we might work on in a therapeutic setting.
Yeah, that would be great. And then maybe 1 or 2 things that you, in your experience, you found unhelpful for regulating.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so as I kind of talk through this list, there might be some, that's a strategy that you would recommend. And, I want to talk a little bit before I go through this list of these are all absolutely acceptable emotion regulation strategies. If you use some of them appear societally to be more adaptive than others, meaning they help us form relationship more, they're not seen as out of the norm societally or culturally, right? But with all of these, they have a place. If you do them all the time and that's the only thing you use, that's when it becomes maladaptive and it can impact those relationships. So the first is avoidance and escape, right? So when I say that, a lot of families are like, are you serious? You want my kid to just avoid talking to me and escape the chore that I've been hounding them to do? And, I think when we're in a heightened emotional state, sometimes we do have to avoid it or escape for a bit before we can come back to it in a less activated way. So avoiding it can actually bring us down. It can actually help regulate our state, our emotional state. Again, if this strategy is used 100% of the time and a kid is avoiding or a parent is avoiding 100% of the time, that's not healthy or adaptive. It's not going to help you grow. But recognizing avoiding this and taking a break actually, and escaping it for a minute actually really helped me. And, when we talk about kids with significant trauma, sometimes they do need to escape the situation, and they can't talk about it. It makes them too heightened in that moment. So we need to be aware of that and understand that's a very reasonable emotion regulation strategy. Another one that I find kids really connect with is distraction. Taking your mind away from the emotional situation. If a kid is crying because of a toy or because of an accident that happened, it's okay to distract and let them regulate a little bit through that distraction. Do a puzzle, play another game, color for a little while. It's okay. Distract yourself with something else. Let your brain and your physiological response, those chemicals, simmer down a little bit. It's okay. And then another is emotional support. That's another emotion regulation strategy. Reaching out to a caregiver or a friend who can give you some encouragement. And, teens, adolescents, texting a friend, like just reach out. It is an important part of regulating, connecting. Once we have that emotional support, we can kind of move on to what's next and start to kind of work on the next emotion regulation strategy, which is acceptance. The practice of acceptance is huge. And this is kind of part of another therapeutic practice that many of us use, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And you're like, okay, I'm accepting that I'm having this thought and that this is happening, and what am I going to do about it? Then you start to problem solve once you can accept it. This is easier for some folks than others. I found in my research, acceptance was actually a pretty close second to somatic relaxation with the strategies that kids just did not like. They were like, Bess, what are you thinking? You want me to accept this? You want me to accept that they don't want to play with me? That's ridiculous. But, if you have an acceptance practice, if that's part of it, you can learn a lot from it, and there can be some good training there. And then the next one is actually one that the kids endorsed is one of their favorites, and that was problem solving. Problem solving is a huge emotion regulation strategy. Partnering with someone and saying, I am angry. What am I going to do about this? Let's problem solve it. Kids want connection. They want to talk. They want to be able to go to their parent, tell them that they're in a heightened emotional state, and for their parent to help them problem solve. What are we going to do about it? Okay, let's talk about it. Let's figure out some reasonable responses. And I found with the kids that I was working with, they wanted to problem solve all day long. They wanted to talk, connect. And back to your earlier comment about being online, I think kids are really hungry for some of that connection and the ability to learn how to problem solve with each other. I don't know if you see that in your practice as well. But
absolutely.
I really found that anytime, even in the classroom, anytime I would give kids an opportunity, I had a little peace poll in my classroom. And if kids would get in an argument, then they could go to the peace pole and they could invite each other to the peace pole to problem solve. And we would, talk about problem solving strategies and what questions to ask when you're problem solving. It was used so much. Kids want to talk about the way they feel. So the next strategy is reframing. And that's basically changing the way you think about an emotional situation. I think about kids on sports teams and their team lost, but reframing and thinking about the excitement of the game and the connections that the teammates had and the goal that they did score. And that's not like silver lining it. There is disappointment in a loss. But if we can reframe and kind of look at all angles of an emotional situation, then it makes us, stronger and healthier and better able to communicate with each other. And then the last emotion regulation strategy that I talk a lot about is repetitive thinking. And especially, and with this one, this is another one kind of like avoidance and escape, where I'm like, I can see both the adaptive and maladaptive side of this emotion regulation strategy, because if we stay in what we call a cognitive loop forever, and it's all we do, then it can be really maladaptive and it can impact our relationships. But some kids need to think about a situation several times, talk it through in their mind several times before they actually approach the problem and move to a problem-solving space or a space of acceptance. And that repetitive thinking can actually calm them down. It can be really important for some kids. So those are kind of the 8 strategies that I talk through and explore with some of my clients, and that I've explored in my classroom as well.
Yeah, and you already mentioned a couple maladaptive ones too, so that was perfect.
Yeah.
Well, that was so helpful for me as a parent, and hopefully all the people, just as a person, even thinking about emotions. Yeah, just thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your expertise with us.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. And I'm grateful to be on this team. It's been a big shift going from a school system to just running my nonprofit and being back in school for 5 years. And I feel very grateful to have landed in Colorado and at Mountain Vista Psychology. So I appreciate the time, Erin. It's been really fun to talk about one of my favorite things.
Well, we're so grateful to have you, and thanks for taking the time, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Erin.
Bye-bye.
Bye.